Hi, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Steve.
I'm Malcolm.
We are the authors of Optimise, a new series from Macmillan. I'd like to thank Macmillan for bringing us here to talk today to you. And we're talking about developing students' word formation skills beyond exam tasks. And we've got a very, very short time, so we're going to dive straight into it. What is word formation? It's something that we kind of feel we have a handle on, that we feel we understand, and that exam tasks test. But once you start to analyse the concept, it's not quite as clear-cut as it seems. For example, she's a very rich and successful lawyer. Would you be happy with that on a word formation exam task? Probably you would. Yeah, success to successful. Okay?
So that's a derivative. What about something like this, where we're going from time to timetable? Is that also word formation? No. No, says Fiona. Why not?
Is it not a compound noun?
Could it not be both?
Ah.
Is word formation compound nouns? Let's leave that question there. We'll come back to that.
All the people in the room stood up as I entered. Person. Would you be happy going from person to people as a word formation item? Some people are nodding.
You're happy?
Okay. Some people are shaking. All right, we're going to explore this. I mean, there is no etymological link between person and people. We kind of say people is the plural of person, but they have totally different etymologies.
Now, what about this? Why have we chosen this as a kind of question mark about word formation? Do you like this? Do you not like this? You don't like it. You're shaking your head. What do you not like about it?
They don't share the same meaning.
They don't share the same meaning, exactly. Now, interestingly here, they do share the same etymology. Likely does come from like, but conceptually, in terms of conceptual connection, there doesn't seem to be one. So that's an issue with word formation.
So, word formation is not a simple concept. Once you start to look into it, it becomes obvious that it's a little bit arbitrary. There aren't necessarily clear rules for determining whether an item is an acceptable word formation item. But we'll want to go on to think about how words work. Word formation is about concepts. When you have a central concept like the act of seeing, and here we've put the verb see in the middle. When you've got a central concept like that, we may want to talk about that concept adjectively or verbally, and we've got a whole range of prefixes and suffixes that change this. So this is the kind of conceptual space that word formation tries to map.
But there are grey areas. It is sometimes subjective, and word formation changes over time. So, for example, I suspect we'd all be happy for terror to go to terrify and terrifying. They're etymologically connected. There's a conceptual connection. But what about terror to terrific, for example? Clearly they're etymologically connected, but today the meaning of terrific really is just wonderful. It might have been different 300 years ago. So is that a fair item? There are question marks.
And the same with a word like one to once. We probably would all feel that that was a fair kind of thing to ask students to do. But what about one to only? Etymologically, they are closely linked. One to first. Now, clearly, conceptually, they're closely linked, but etymologically, they're totally different. Would we feel that that was a fair item?
Now, in terms of exams, let's think about the Cambridge exams for a moment. For example, first and proficiency. What they're mainly testing is affixation, so prefixes and suffixes, and internal changes or irregular forms. Those people who prepare students for the Cambridge exams, do you think that generally in the word formation tasks there's an equal balance of prefixes and suffixes? No. Which one's tested more often? Suffixes, right, by miles. Usually in one word formation task there's one prefix. All the others in some way, apart from the internal changes, are suffixes. And interestingly, in terms of prefixes and suffixes, the subset that they use in the tasks is a tiny percentage of all the possible prefixes and suffixes. So if you're just preparing students using word formation tasks, you're actually missing out on an enormous number of prefixes and suffixes that are vital for lexical development. In terms of irregular forms and internal changes, usually at first, usually at proficiency, they test one or two of these kind of things. Often there are spelling mistakes, spelling changes from appear to apparently. We lose the E, for example. What's interesting about this as well, I think, is that, and it's not just with words that have internal changes, things like photograph, photographer, there's a pronunciation issue where there's a change of stress or a change of sound. And of course, word formation tasks are written tasks. They don't test at all in the exam pronunciation. But I think if we solely do them as written tasks in the classroom, then we're leaving out a huge element, which is pronunciation. So, of course, we need to do the written work, but we should also do the oral work. Appear to apparently. How does it sound? What is the pronunciation change?
So, our title is about going beyond exam word formation to develop students' wider word formation skills. But we think that exam word formation skills is an important thing to focus on. We want to give you a couple of practical activities that we think you can use in the classroom to just practice this kind of exam-focused word formation with your students. So here's one we're going to do together. Odd one out. Students are given a set of 3 root words. 2 of them form a derivative in the same way, and then the third forms the same derivative slightly differently. So you've got to spot the odd one out. For example, polite, mature, believable. It's impolite, immature, and unbelievable. So believable is the odd one out. All right, we're going to try a few together. Are you ready? Create, resist, teach. Which is the odd one out?
Any
and
ideas?
Why? Teach why?
In what sense?
Oh.
Ah.
Ah, okay.
Ah. We hadn't thought of that
I
one.
wasn't thinking of that. But okay, I'll give you that one. Teach is as a verb, teach is irregular, but the other two. So maybe if you're happy to consider the simple past as a derivative, then teach is the odd one out. Okay, any others?
Create.
Why?
Creative.
Creative.
Why do you say create?
I said create. Somebody else did as well.
So why do you say create?
Creative. And
Teachable, resistible,
Teachable, resistible, creative. Oh, that's interesting.
There isn't always just one
There's
right
not
answer.
just one answer. The answer we were thinking of, okay, teaching is all about mind reading, and if your students can't read your mind, then they've got it wrong. Creator, resistor, teacher. Too far away. Okay, all right, try this one.
Let's move on to the next one.
This one's even further away.
This is even more difficult.
Why?
Description. Calculation.
Okay, I'll give you that one. Why not? Description. Except, do describe and calculate form the nouns in the same way? Because describe changes the B to a P, so maybe they're not quite the same.
The discussion is the most important aspect.
Think about adjectives.
Yes.
Incalculable, indescribable, unthinkable.
Unthinkable.
So think is the odd one out because the negative adjective is un.
Last one, probably the most difficult of all. Say again? Why?
Very good.
Fantastic.
That's what we were thinking.
Here's our second task that we can do with students, where we put a number of different words on the board, and students have to compete to spot pairs of words that have derivatives in common. So here's a group of words. For example, universe, universal, practice, practical. They both end in al, so that's a pair.
Can you spot any other pairs? Shorten and freshen. Very good. Yes, I like that one.
Pleasure,
University and activity.
pleasure and
Yeah.
failure.
Pleasure and
Good
failure.
one. Very good one.
Appearance,
Shortage and storage.
appearance and deliverance.
Appearance and deliverance. Very good.
And very interesting to contrast deliverance with delivery.
Displease, disappear. Okay. All right.
Okay,
Now-
we've got one more task. We're actually not going to do this together, but as Steve said, there is a PDF of all of these slides, so when you download that, you can look at this task yourself. Now, so far, all of the activities we've done have focused on individual words. Now, of course, that's fine, but that's not enough, because we haven't provided any context. And we always need to encourage our students, once we've done those stages, to go to the next stage and use those words within the context of a sentence or a phrase. Because if we just look at word formation in terms of isolated words, we miss a huge element. For example, if I say to you, what's the noun from the adjective high, you're probably going to say height, aren't you? But actually, collocation, idiom, and meaning determine the form. And it's not height here. That would be wrong. Good morning, Your Royal Highness. Depending on the collocation, depending on the idiom, that determines the form.
So how are we going to get our students to focus on context in the classroom? Working with exam type material. Here is a Cambridge First word formation task. It's about garlic, an incredible vegetable. So the first thing, remember that these word formation tasks are grammatical first and then lexical. They need to figure out the part of speech and then get at what is the part of speech. So what we're going to do is we're going to give our students this without any words. That's a distraction. Let's leave that for now. Just give them the text and ask them to focus on what part of speech is missing. So if you look at the first one, number 17, it says, China is currently the largest blank of garlic. What part of speech is missing? A noun. Now I want my students to start brainstorming possible nouns. What do you think it could conceivably be? Producer, exporter, importer, consumer. Okay. And then I'm going to give my students the words. Maybe I'm going to give them in order. Maybe I'm going to mix them up and let my students choose. Here I'm giving them in alphabetical order. My students should, after the brainstorming, I should have got my students to the point where they think, okay, product, it must be producer. So I'm working with the exam task to take them through focusing on context.
Now let's come back to compounding. Fiona said a few minutes ago, compounding is nothing to do with word formation. Cambridge would disagree. In their handbooks for first and proficiency, they say that with word formation tasks, the main focus is on vocabulary, in particular, the use of affixation, internal changes, and compounding. And they have tested at first in the past, time to timetable. They've also tested shine to sunshine. We've actually looked back though at the last 25 or 30 years of word formation tasks, and those actually are pretty much the only two that they've ever tested.
So apart from those, I think Fiona's actually right.
I think Fiona,
apart
in one
from
sense,
that,
is right. But they claim that compounding is what they consider to be word formation. And it's quite interesting that they rarely test it. I think partly that's to do with the mechanics of that task. It's actually very difficult to come up with a keyword that then leads to a compound. But compounds, as we all know, are an essential part of Lexis, an enormous part of Lexis. So even though they're rarely tested in first and proficiency, we need to focus on them in the classroom. Some of you may well know Dictionary Word of the Year. Some dictionaries, like the Collins Dictionary and the Oxford Dictionary, they have a word of the year. It might be a word that's entered the lexicon for the first time, or it might be a word that has been in the dictionary for a while, but nobody's really used it, and suddenly everyone's using it for some reason. So for example, in 2014, we had photobomb for the Collins Dictionary. This year, or last year, the Oxford Dictionary, 2018, toxic. Are there any words there you don't know?
Dad bod.
Dad bod. Steve, show your dad bod. This is a perfect example of a dad bod. Love handles and a fat tummy. The body
We didn't
of a
rehearse
dad.
that bit.
I have one too. Any other words? Omnishambles. Steve, explain omnishambles.
Omnishambles means a completely confused and messed up situation. I think it comes from
The thick of it.
a sitcom called The Thick of It, which was a sitcom in the late 90s, early 2000s, set in government, and it was a term that they used in that sitcom, that it was an omnishambles, and I think that's why maybe it was around 2012, was it?
It was around 2012.
Yeah. Okay. What about, there's a couple of really interesting ones there.
Flogging.
What about plugging?
Plugging, yeah,
Mal
great
knows
one.
Plugging.
Anyone know what plugging is?
Go on. You, yes.
When you're picking up rubbish while you're out jogging.
Picking up litter or rubbish while jogging.
Are you Swedish?
Are
Yeah, you
you
are.
Swedish? Brilliant.
Right.
Because this
Okay.
comes from a Swedish phrasal verb,
Maybe
doesn't
let them
it?
say it.
Could you tell us?
To pick up rubbish.
In Swedish.
Plocka,
Blogger?
plocka and jogga.
But what's the phrasal verb? There's a
Is
phrasal
it
verb.
like
isn't it?
plocka up or something?
Plocka
Plocka
upp.
upp, right, okay.
It's a Swedish phrasal verb.
All right.
And that's
What-
where this comes from.
Why do you think some of these were in the news at the time? Like, what about, Brexit, obviously. Why do you think single use was in the news at that point? It's about plastics, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Particularly, I don't know how international it was, but particularly in Britain, there was a big part of the national debate about single-use plastics, exactly.
But what's interesting about these, so many of them, photobomb, bake-off, normcore, binge watch, dad bod, man spreading, they're compounds. We love, in English, taking two words and putting them together to make another word. So even though it's rarely tested in exams, it's a key aspect of Lexis.
So the way in which words are formed, the way in which compounds are formed, or portmanteau words, or the ways in which we form blends, there are a few different possibilities of how we put the words together. We might form a compound using all of one word and all of another word. In the classroom, we saw the example of photobomb. Now in the classroom, we might play around with this with students, giving them the wrong word and asking them to to provide the correct word. So we don't say photo attack, we say photobomb. We don't say group sourcing, we say crowdsourcing.
Oops.
Very good.
Sometimes it's all of one word, part of another word, and sometimes that's the first word, and sometimes that's the second word. All of these are the first word. So a non-alcoholic cocktail is a mocktail. One for you, Mike, at the back. A skimpy swimsuit with shoulder straps for men. Mankini. Very good. Those people who've seen Borat, that's what he wears.
Okay, now I like the way these demonstrate that they work best when they kind of overlap. Like an estimate that's a guess is a guesstimate. They're kind of held together because they overlap. A holiday where you stay at home? Staycation. Interesting as well that we're quite happy to take on the American term vacation there and use it in staycation.
Journalism that's churned out quickly. There's a clue in the verb. Journalism. Journalism.
A monster bride. Bridezilla. Which two words are being put together there? Bride and Godzilla. Yes, okay.
Sometimes it's all of the second word. The first one's easy. Brexit. Could it be anything else? I live in Athens. Grexit. People were talking about Grexit a few years ago. Brexit's usually seen as a right-wing phenomenon, but some people on the left also believe in Brexit, and that's sometimes called Lexit. Lexit, a left-wing Brexit.
Have you any idea what the next one is with enemy? Frenemy. A person with whom you're friendly, but you have an intense rivalry.
Like,
Malcolm.
yes. And the next one also relates to me and Steve, because we have
But we also have
a bromance, right?
There's a few possibilities for pop. K-pop, I
very
guess.
good. Yeah, K-pop. Korean
It's like
pop
Korean
music.
pop, isn't it? Alcopop.
Britpop.
Britpop.
Soap. Think about TV. Docu-soap. Brilliant. Documentary that's a soap opera. Sometimes it's part of one word, part of another word. So the first one is obviously, what are the two words? Spanish and English. And the next one I'm not actually totally sure how to pronounce. I think I would say dramedy, but I've heard other people say dramedy. That's a combination of drama, comedy. Next one? Flexible and vegetarian. Someone who's mainly a vegetarian, but occasionally likes a bit of bacon or chicken. But not really a vegetarian at all then. Frappuccino. Frappe, a good Greek word. And cappuccino, yep. Glamping, what's glamping? Glamour or glamorous and camping. Steve goes glamping quite a lot.
Mark just goes camping.
I just go camping. Affluenza.
I don't think it is.
Affluence and influenza. It's kind of a criticism of consumerism and materialism. And sometimes, in fact, it's 3 words. Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg.
Okay, so you've got all this compounding going on, and exams that are barely touching any of this really productive mechanic by which words are formed. They also don't really touch, exams don't really touch on the whole area of clipping. Now, clipping is when we cut off bits of words and take what's left. And we don't just end up with a word that means the same necessarily, we end up with words that in different contexts might have different meanings. So for example, we might lose the end of the word and end up with exam. Now in an academic sense, exam and examination may mean the same. There's a difference in register perhaps, but they may mean the same. But in a medical context, you probably have a medical examination, maybe not a medical exam. A medical exam is what a doctor takes rather than gives you. We might lose the start of the word, ending up with phone. We might lose both the start and the end of the word, leaving us with flu. Or we might form derivatives with other diminutives with other changes like husband becoming hubby.
As Steve said, there's sometimes an issue of register and formality. Not always, but often the clipped form is more informal. And because of that, not always, but often the clipped form is used more frequently in spoken English. Sometimes also, as Steve said, there's a change in meaning. We would say on closer examination, we wouldn't say on closer exam. And sometimes there are spelling and pronunciation changes too.
So what about these? And this is an important word formation skill for your students, because your students are likely to come across these things and they need to be able to kind of expand them to understand where they come from, what they mean. Vegetables. Combo, combination. Notice the spelling change from combination to combo. Is anybody Australian? You're Australian. You will know, or if you've been to Australia, you know perfectly well that Australians love this. Make a short word and stick an O on the end. Red Joe, Smoko. Very, very productive in Australian English. Tummy. Now, until Malk came up with this, Malk suggested this, I hadn't really kind of thought that it's stum, tum, tummy. I hadn't really made the connection myself mentally. Brolly, obviously, is a contraction of umbrella, brolly.
Now, what about this one? To diss. I've seen it written with 1 S or 2. To diss someone, to disrespect someone. Yeah, very gangster rap. And this last one, bus. Now, we don't use the long form, really, anymore. But those people who studied Latin, by, with, or from us all, it comes from omnibus. And we do, in fact, still say sometimes, the man on the Clapham omnibus.
Yeah, which probably
I do.
Maybe seen as a bit sexist these days.
In fact, I
I'm not sure,
don't.
but-
Steve does.
No. So, just to summarise what we've been talking about. Exams are fine, but they only test a small subset of ways in which words are formed. And in fact, the small subset that they test, they only really test a small subset of that. They test affixation, internal changes, a little bit of compounding. So we need to get our students more aware of how word formation exists in a wider sense than in exams. And we need to consider context and phrasing. Look at this example. I'm sure if you teach students up to around about B1, B2 level, I'm sure you're very familiar with this idea. What is the adverb from friend? Students will often, partly because of the form, but partly because they think there must be one, they will put friendly. But that's the adjective. So what is the adverb from friend? In one sense,
exactly.
in one sense there isn't one. But in another sense, we need to use a phrase like in a friendly way to express that concept. Yeah? So we need to make our students more aware of these kind of processes as well. So finally, we need to develop our students' word formation skills beyond exam tasks, because exam tasks only cover a small portion of the whole field of word formation.
Now, do take a photo of this. That's the link to the PDF. Or you can write it down, but easier to take a photo. And do find us on Facebook.
This is my professional page. So if you go there and like it, that's a bit more professional. But you're welcome to find my personal account. We can be friends. I let anybody in. But on my personal account, don't be surprised if you see more pics of what I'm having for dinner.
So that's it. That's half an hour.
Okay, spot on. Very good. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much for coming.